best for me to just come home.
Right.
And I think I was really sick. I've been more
Welcome,
sick.
everyone. If we could just take a minute to settle down and bring conversation to an end, we're ready to get started.
Taste or smell.
My name is Emily Milan. I'm chair of the Voter Information Committee, and I thank you all so much for coming today to be a part of this event, especially the candidates. We really appreciate you taking your time to be here. And of course, thank you to the League of Women Voters for helping us moderate tonight's event.
Please put the microphone in front of your...
Is that better? Sorry. I'm a little short. It was definitely set up for someone much taller than me. All right, so a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you can please silence your cell phones or smartwatches, anything you have that might ding and interfere in the middle of the forum would be really helpful if we just turn that off now. Also, restrooms, if anyone's looking, are right across the hall. If you use the exit back here, water fountain is out in the lobby. All right. So, very excited to welcome you here. We have our three candidates for the remainder of the Board of Selectmen's position that was vacated by Steve Ford. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to Steve's family. His loss was a tremendous loss for the town, as was our loss on Voter Information Committee of Peg Rose. So the town really lost two dedicated servants this year, and we thank you, all three of you, for stepping up to try and help fill that role and complete this term of Stevens. So as you all know, the election will take place on Tuesday, September the 21st. The polling hours are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you have not registered to vote already, you have missed the deadline for this election. However, we have a special town meeting coming up in October. It's October the 18th at 6:30. There is still time to register to vote in special town meeting, so please take advantage of that if you haven't already. So I will turn things over to Joan.
Thank you, Emily. Additional housekeeping. In order to get more questions in, we ask that you please hold all applause until the very end. Unless you want to get it out right now, do it. That way you can hear every candidate and what every candidate speaks for, okay? Welcome to the Harwich Candidates Forum for the seat of Board of Selectmen, sponsored by the Harwich Voter Information Committee, better known as VIC. As noted, my name is Joan Craig of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. I am not a resident of the town of Harwich. I have to put a plug in, please, for the League, and it is for both men and women, and we would love to have you join us. We are an active league. We are a nonpartisan political organization. Encourage information and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area does not endorse political party or candidates in elections, but does advocate for issues that the organization has studied and taken a position on after consensus from our members. Candidates participating in today's forum have been given the format ahead of time and have agreed in writing by email to the instructions. We are allowing each candidate a 2-minute opening statement, a 2-minute response to questions, and a 1.5-minute closing statement. Each candidate has the option to utilize his or her time to respond to another candidate's prior comments or to expand on issues not related to the question asked. Issues not related to the question asked during their response time or during their closing statement. I will allow the speaker the opportunity to finish his or her sentence as we approach the end time, but will stop the speaker as appropriate, and I will do it politely, firmly, and with a smile. I want to introduce our runners, Chris and Sophia. Sophia is right there. Chris is over there. If you have index cards, please write them out or print them out clearly so we can read them, and they will You can just raise your hand when you have one, and they will pick it up. They will bring it to Joy and Emily. If there are questions that are duplicates, we usually put them together and talk about all of that particular issue in one question. I'm introducing the timers from the League of Women Voters. Thank you for your time, Anita and Lynn. And they will be holding up the 1 minute and the 30-second time paddles, if you want to show both. And the stop paddle, okay? And you don't have to stop in the middle. I've been known to do that. In the middle of a sentence, you can finish your sentence, but it can't be 4 paragraphs long. I want to say hello to Jamie from Channel 18 and thank her also. Thank you, Jamie. With that, prior to this evening, we did a little technology. Hold on. It's here. That's what confused me. That's okay. And we drew numbers. And what will happen is we will have Julie start with her opening statement, followed by Mark, and then Jeff. We will have Jeff, his closing statement, followed by Mark, and then Julie. And then when we have our first question, that will start with Mark, then Jeff, then Julie. And this was all done very technically with little pieces of paper. So let's begin. Oh, yes. Well, that's the opening statement. So hold on. Julie, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement. And oh, by the way, they did allow me to use their first names, and I do tend to sometimes mess up. So if I forgot to ask that question of the third candidate or the second candidate, I know you'll let me know. So let's begin with Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, and thanks for coming. I appreciate the League and the Voter Information Committee holding this forum. It's a great opportunity to see faces of the citizens of our town. And Julie Kavanaugh, obviously, this is my second run for the board. I did serve on the board from 2016 to 2019. I was the chair from 2018 to 19. I've lived here in Harwich for over 20 years. My children have gone through all the schools, Harwich Elementary, Harwich Middle, 1 year of Harwich High School, and then on to Monomoy, and have now just recently graduated college, which I can't even believe I'm saying that. And so we've really watched our family settle here, grow here, watch our kids go all the way through the school systems and all the wonderful events. Between doing brownies to doing soccer to doing the booster club and all the wonderful things that happen in the middle of that as our children grow up. I've participated in all of it and grown from it and met so many wonderful people. I'm obviously very committed to the town. As I said, I've served before, and I hope to have the opportunity to serve again. I feel that I am the best candidate in the sense that I have the experience having served on the board previously, and this being a shortened term, which Stephen Ford, I'd like to take a minute. Stephen filled my seat when I stepped down, and I feel a need to fulfill his term, and I feel that I can hit the ground running, knowing the very many agenda items that are on the board's agenda, and I'm familiar with most every one of them. So I thank you for coming tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Julie. And just as a little aside, I forgot to mention that these 3 individuals are running for an 8-month term of the Board of Selectmen position, just to clarify that. Mark.
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad to see you. This time last night, I didn't think we'd see anybody here. But my name is Mark Kelleher. I'm running for selectman. I was thinking today about my history here in Harwich. It goes back about 65 years from when I was a young kid. My parents would bring me down here. I worked at the old Belmont Hotel as a beach boy and a lifeguard. I was a policeman in town here. I used to work at the Chuck Wagon, and I used to direct traffic on the weekends at the old Modern Theater. When I graduated from college, I became a project manager for a large construction firm in Boston. Projects I was involved in were Bayside Expo, World Trade Center, Marina Bay, amongst others. During that job as a project manager, I managed budgets, timelines. I worked with various subcontractors throughout the city. I also dealt with unions, so I have a varied experience in management and in running large construction projects. Later in my career, I changed occupations. I became a teacher, and I became a reading specialist because I was interested in young kids who couldn't read. And I developed a program at the middle school I was at where we did a reading intervention, and I have to say it was very successful with kids graduating middle school and going on to high school and college. So I think I bring a unique skill set to this job with both my project management experience and my experience working with young kids and students. And I think these challenges are very appropriate for the challenges we face with wastewater, affordable housing, and school financing. So I hope you will consider me for your vote on September 21st. Early voting starts on Monday, so keep that in mind. You can vote early. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you very much to all of you who have taken time out of your day to come here and spend it with us. Thank you to the League and to Vic. And my name is Jeff Handler, and I'm running for Selectman. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised here, and I'm about 53 years old. And my family has a 100-year history in this town, and I think that's important to recognize. The Handlers have been here for an awful long time. I graduated Harwich High School in 1986, and I went off to college and came back in 1991 after I graduated to start my adult life here in Harwich. My wife, Sarah, who also is a Harwich native, we have 4 boys. Joshua Griffin, they both went through the Harwich Monomoy school system. And then I have 2 younger boys, Wyatt and Brooks, and they will be entering the Monomoy school system shortly. After I graduated college, I decided to take the entrepreneurial route. I opened a health club in Hyannis, built it from the ground up. I also worked with Cape Cod Healthcare as the director of sports medicine for a brief period of time, and I think that lends value to what I can bring to the 5th seat here, the Board of Selectmen. I volunteered probably since 1995, 96. And my path of volunteering had a lot to do with athletics and young athletes. I coached baseball, basketball, soccer, football, also part of the Monomoy Wellness Collaborative, which unfortunately got a little beaten up by COVID, but the intentions were there. I love this town, and I believe in this town, and I believe in the people of this town. And it's time for me, as a lifelong resident of this town, to increase my commitment to this town. And that's exactly what I intend on doing. And I do ask for your vote on September 21st.
Thank you very much. And questions are coming in, so thank you all. We'll begin. And we will begin with Mark. Can you describe your community involvement? Some of you have mentioned it. And give one tangible example of a specific contribution you made in that area. Mark.
In terms of community involvement, I am a Meals on Wheels volunteer. Some of the more vulnerable residents in town I deliver meals to. I'm the person that I tell the director, because I have a truck, that when it's tough to get to places, please call on me. I'm also part of a prison ministry where some of the people who I work with come from this community. I work with them on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. And I've been involved in sports and after-school activities through the years through my children who attended high school and middle school here. If you ask me for the one major accomplishment that I've done, I think it's the Meals on Wheels. I've got to know the people. I've been able to see when they are in distress and let the directors know so that they can get help. And, I've developed friendships with the people who I have served over the past couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. So to elaborate a little bit more on my volunteer here in my years in Harwich, Coach, I played baseball in high school for Harwich. I played baseball in college, and I also played here in the Cape Cod Baseball League. So one of the things I'd like to add to the list of activities I volunteered in was I was the general manager for the Harwich Mariners for a year, back when they were the Mariners. And I think for me, I chose to focus on the youth of our town, as they, I feel, are the future of our town. And one of my focuses, not just in the coaching of the actual sport, but to mentor those kids. There have been plenty of kids who have stayed at my home, lived at our house because they didn't have places to go. Had a strong involvement on what our youth chose to do after they graduated high school. And I think for me, that is where I feel I have had the most impact for our young community, and I'm still involved. Right now, I'm the sitting vice president of Monomoy Little League Baseball. And as I stated, it goes well beyond the on-the-field coaching and being part of our kids just on the field. I think it has a lot to do with mentoring and allowing them to understand and reach their potential.
Thank you very much. Julie?
So as I mentioned earlier, I've had different opportunities to volunteer, and a couple that come to mind, other than the Board of Selectmen, are CCD teacher, a participant in, excuse me, helping to form the booster club for Monomoy when the high school. Sure, sorry. Excuse me, I have something in my throat. So I've had different volunteer opportunities, luckily, in town, and some of them were teaching Sunday school, some of them were volunteering to teach T-ball. I would say, though, my biggest influencer was participating and running for the Board of Selectmen, because ultimately I learned a lot about the guts of our town and how things function. Even though I have a government, a BA in government from Stonehill College, a master's degree for government from Harvard. You know, I worked at the State House, but ultimately I feel that you don't really know the doings and the goings-on of how your town is running until you're part of every mechanism. And sitting on that board and having all the abilities to know all of the information budget-wise and really commitment-wise, the different board members and everybody willing to put in time for housing. I sat on the Housing Institute, which, again, learned a ton about how to bring, more housing to town, but the complicated methods that are involved in terms of zoning and in terms of funding, all of these things, federal and state. So I would have to say that my volunteering in terms of running for the board was probably my biggest influence, and I feel like taught me the most about the town in which we're lucky to live.
Thank you. Next question. If you are elected, do you have a specific area of town government that you would like to focus on? Jeff?
Could you elaborate on that question a little bit in terms of town government?
Specific area of town government that you would like to focus on. My sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if there are weaknesses or strengths or things that needed expansion on or needed help with, town government that you would like to focus on.
Sure. I think for me, coming in as a selectman person, I think I would focus a great deal on our wastewater issue, and I would focus a great deal on our housing. It's been said that I see puzzles, and I like to put pieces of puzzles together. And our town is a great big puzzle. And I think all of the issues that are in front of our town right now have something to do with each other. So as a selectman, and having the opportunity to touch all facets of decisions our town will make facing the issues that are presented before us, those two areas, I think, would be where I would focus most of my attention. I also don't want to forget about small business. Small business is the lifeblood of this town. It's the lifeblood of Cape Cod. And as small business goes, we go. And I think there needs to be a little bit more care given to the small businesses of Harwich to ensure that they succeed and give them the tools that they need to achieve their goals and be exactly what they dreamed of being when they chose to open their business. So thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
So I would agree with Jeff that they're all interconnected, and it's hard to pick one. If I had to pick one, I would pick housing, because housing is what is driving our economy as well. And businesses are affected by the lack of housing. Our schools are affected by the lack of housing. The need to have more affordable and workforce housing is crucial to this town. It's crucial to the entire Cape. And if we don't work hard at creating various forms of housing in a way that is conducive to our community, we impact our schools, we impact our economy, we hurt our small businesses. And so to me, I would say that housing is first paramount. And it certainly also ties into the sewer and the need to, of course, create housing and look at that comparison of how we can use the sewering that we are, forced to do to also ease the burden on our wastewater. So I would say housing.
Thank you. Mark?
I think I would agree with Julie. Housing is our number one issue. I've heard it said that it's almost too late to do anything about affordable housing. I disagree. I think it's a matter of survival for this town. Dennis is just committed to producing 36 units per year so they can reach a safe harbor limit as far as 40Bs. Brewster, if you read in the Cape Cod Times this week, has several developments underway. I think we can and we have to address this. I read that the timeline for large projects can be 6 to 10 years. I think we have to make a commitment and a timeline that we'll get some affordable housing here within 4 to 5 years, project done and completed. I liked what I heard at the select board hearings about collecting back taxes on owner-unknown properties. I think that could do two things: bring in money for the town, but also free up some land in the town that can be used for affordable housing. I do think it's a very important portion. I would have said wastewater, but I thought the meeting this past Monday was very encouraging. The engineering firm impressed me. Dan Pelletier impressed me. I think we've got a sense of where we're going. So I feel comfortable about that as it goes forward. It's a long-term project. One other thing about local government that I'd like to improve is communication. I know that sometimes I send emails, I don't get responses. I was a teacher, and if I didn't respond to a parent, I was in big trouble. And I think as part of if I am elected selectman or a town person, you at least owe it to the people who contact you to respond that you have received an email. So communication to me is very important. It's a part of a big focus of what I have of civility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. What gaps do you see in services provided by the town, and how would you propose to fill these gaps? Are there areas where you think the town can be better? Julie?
In terms of gaps, I think it's a broad question, so I'll do my best to answer it. I think that there are probably areas that we could be more communicative to townspeople, although I will say it's also hard when you're having sat on the board, you're doing your meetings and they're lengthy meetings and you're trying to get the word out, and if people aren't tuned in, that's a little bit hard. I would say that there's probably better ways, a way to maybe combine our community with elderly, with the student population. I'd love to see more of that. I feel that that's a great way that our kids learn, and it helps our elderly. And I know that Council on Aging does a terrific job, and so does Monomoy, in terms of trying to bring students and the elderly population together. That would be a gap I'd like to see to do a little bit more on. I also think it would be great to have, I know that I had an issue when my kids were in school in terms of after-school programs and such that are at the community center. I spoke at length with Eric in terms of trying to get, vans and things to increase the ability for kids to go from one program to another. Other than that, I would say that I would like to hear from the citizens what the gap is and how to address it.
Thank you. Mark?
In terms of services gaps, I am concerned long-term about funding for the schools. We're going to have a short-term advantage for when the elementary school funding is settled with Chatham. But beyond that point, I think we're going to have funding difficulties. I think we have to look at the Monomoy Regional School Agreement so that Chatham can pick up more of the cost. I think it's, as we get into it more, we'll see with population and assessed values, as other towns in the state have, it will allow for a more equitable allocation of costs. In terms of other services, as Julie said, communication. I think it'd be very important for the selectmen and the town administrator to get out into the town, the villages, have meetings, learn about the town. As part of my campaign, I've gone door to door. I don't know anything about the treasure chest, but I learned a lot about the treasure chest going door to door. And I learned that a lot of people really like the treasure chest. I wouldn't have known that otherwise. So communication is very important. I think if people don't come here to meetings, there's got to be another way to get out there and hear what they have to say. So that's it. Get out into the community. I think long-term we have to look at the school funding. And, I really do, based on what I've heard. And unsolicited, I heard many, many comments that people wanted the treasure chest open, and I think we should work in that way. I know the facilities department is very important with all the new facilities we'd have in town, but I think we can work both ways out. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I think this is a fantastic question because in my 9 weeks now of digging deep and doing the deep dive into our town's inner workings, finding those gaps were of interest to me. And in talking to the people of our town, as many as I could possibly talk to in that short amount of time, one thing that I think stood out was facilitating the permitting process for our contractors and the people who do the work here in this town. There's been numerous people who have mentioned to me that the permitting process, which is a revenue-generating process as well, takes just too long. And we have a new position in our building department, and hopefully with the new person coming in, that will change. But that was a gap. That is a gap that I think can be remedied fairly easily. I think another larger scale gap is our relationship with our government in Boston. And I've got some strong connections there. And I think that's how our town finds grants. And we find money for things that we can use locally, small business and such. I also think that the town needs to work a little bit better and understand the partnership that it has with its community, its voters, its residents, and its business people. And for me, that would be one of the focuses in my term as a selectman, would be to foster a little bit better community contact and communication with the people of Harwich. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. What specific steps can be taken to make town offices and services available to those working during the day? Mark?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer on the top of my head. I was a working person, and I would leave my home at 5:30 in the morning and not get back to 7 at night. So I think that basically says if it is an issue, and I don't know if it is an issue, but if it is an issue, consider perhaps some Saturday morning hours. I know there's additional cost involved in that. But, most town business now can be handled online. So I think if you are adept with the computer, you can do a lot of town business in terms of paying for your dump fee, your beach fee, your taxes can all be done online. I mean, the only time I think you really need to come into town hall is, like Jeff said, if you were doing some permitting where you really need to speak to somebody. And perhaps Saturday hours. Sometimes you just need to take the time off to work. I just want to just refer back to what Jeff said about grants. Now, we have about 4 or 5 years of infrastructure money availability. And I want to emphasize how important it is for the town to get teed up for that. There's about $51 billion between water and wastewater. We need to have a team in shape and in place, and I know Dan Pelletier is onto it, but I think there's a lot of places where grant money has to come. I noticed that in Yarmouth, they hired an assistant town administrator who is very familiar with getting grants for water treatment plants, sewage plants. I just want to say the town needs to be ready to get this money, to get its share. It's our money. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I think we have to embrace technology. I was doing a project a little while ago in Pocasset, and most of what I needed to do to begin the project and to actually get what they called an easy permit was online. So I truly believe that the town needs to move forward with the informational technology sector. And I also think what comes with that is an educational component to the people of Harwich, because I can promise you it was no easy task to navigate my way through that easy permit, so they called it. I don't know if increasing hours is the right answer. I think maybe we could wait 1 or 2 days a little heavier with hours, maybe increase the hours a little longer and kind of tier our departments as need be. But again, that's a really hard question, I think, for us to answer with a good concrete way to remedy this issue. But I definitely believe that the online and technology needs to be leveraged a little bit better here in our town. Thank you.
Julie?
So first of all, I appreciate working, till 5 and having town hall closed. I'm doing that every day too, so it's difficult and frustrating. But I will point out that while I was on the board, the building department and the other facilities over here closed, the town hall closed at noontime, and we stayed open late on Mondays, and if it was a holiday, on Tuesdays. And we were generally in the building at the same time at those evening hours because we were doing our meetings. And I think it went on for probably about 2 years, maybe longer. And then we took a poll really looking to see how much work was going on in those evening hours, because it was a good thing to offer. We did switch it without having an impact of cost. We switched the hours so they managed within their departments of who would be working on those Monday or Tuesday evenings. And I think that that's a fantastic thing to go back to if we find a true need for it. But what we were also finding on the other end, in terms of trying to not impact cost, was that closing half day on Friday was frustrating to others. So, you do one thing and another, and they both impact. I would also say my job is the permitting manager for a construction company, and unfortunately, Harwich is not online for building permits. You can do simple, I think it's an express permit for, roof and things like that, but you're filing a building permit in paper here in Harwich. And as far as the health and everything else, you're doing paper applications. So yes, I think the technology to allow people to do more online would be terrific. Again, the town should look at those costs. But unfortunately, we don't have the online capability that other towns do have, and we should look to expand that.
Thank you. This is a two-part, 2 questions came, so I'm going to combine them a bit, so listen up. We've already touched on wastewater. First, do you believe there was transparency in how the DHY negotiations were held? And after that, wastewater infrastructure cost estimates for Harwich is $300 million. 4 billion for all of Cape Cod. Sorry, I didn't quite get that. What are the thoughts do you have to best fund the Harwich cost over these next 25 years? And the lucky first person is Jeff.
Thank you. Can you repeat that? No, I'm just kidding. Do I feel there was transparency with the DHY? I think the short answer is no. I think there was a lot of things that were occurring that we as taxpayers and voters and residents had no idea about what was going on. That being said, Mark and I were at the meeting on Monday night, and I don't feel that way anymore. And I don't want to look back into the past anymore. I think we have an amazing team in the board and with the new consultant and with Dan Pelletier and with our town administrator. And I really believe that we are now on the right path. And I believe that our townspeople have a team that we can trust and that we should trust to move us forward. There was so much information happening Monday night that I think the general consensus when everybody left, and the people I talked to who weren't here, who saw the meeting, that we are infinitely in a better place. There are some things that didn't get buttoned up, maybe some IA systems we need to take a better look at, and we can't close the door on those things, but I think we're in an infinitely better situation. How do I think funding this project can happen? I think the 2% increase in our short-term rental tax and then having that allocated toward partly wastewater, I think is going to be a big deal. I also think that getting the open owner-unknown land parcels back on the tax roll is a tremendous idea, and I believe wholeheartedly that that will definitely benefit. But I also think we need to look at controlling costs, not just finding ways to pay for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie?
So I do believe that the DHY was done openly. I mean, those discussions began when I was on the board, and I've watched them go on over the course of time. I think there's difference of opinions on whether an IMA, an intermunicipal agreement, or a regional agreement is better for the town. I would say our IMA with Chatham works, and the regional agreement that we were talking about with DHY also would have worked, and we were equally represented at the table based on what we were going to be putting in for waste towards that system and the overall cost it would have saved the three towns. I would also say that, since I've watched the discussions, and I know that there's been sort of a lack of communication or a miscommunication in the press. I was listening to the meeting on Monday night, and I heard the clarifications by the board. I would also say that there are others who, that feel differently in the sense that maybe we weren't willing to move forward and maybe we've missed the boat. I'm not sure if that's the case, and it's unfortunate if we have, because there was a lot of money to be saved. 3 towns versus 2 towns, there's more money to be saved. We're going to be a user on one end of an IMA agreement like we are with Chatham. We're going to be part of something, building something and saving those costs and get lower, better rates on the other end. In terms of paying for it, we're talking about increasing the Airbnb tax. We're talking about a WIF fund, a water investment fund. So you have all of these different elements. I also listened to the fact that the land debt is coming down. I think the figure was $165,000. There's other ways to look at that monies to create an investment fund, and it can only be used by certain elements of financial purposes, which Carol Coppola and our team is great. They're very talented. We need to look at innovative ways to pay for our wastewater, and it has to happen. We have to look really soon. We need to be ready. That's it.
Thank you very much. Mark?
I don't think the DHY issue was handled well at all. I think there was a lack of transparency. It seems like it was being done in the newspaper. On June 28th, there was a meeting. It was reported in the press that the town administrator said that Harwich was out. 16 of the 18 people who were there thought that they heard that. The next selectmen's meeting, it was said, no, we're still back in there. I happened to go to the Yarmouth selectmen's meeting in August, in part to say, hey, Harwich is having a meeting, maybe we could still do something together. They said that from that June 28th meeting, they had never heard a thing from Harwich. So if you're a partner with somebody, you've spoken with somebody for 2 years, that's not the way to do business in the press. Someone should have picked up the phone from Harwich and said, there was a mistake. We are in this, and let's continue discussions. Or be straight out and honest and say, we're out of it, okay? What could also concern me is the DHY agreement, from what I understand from Dan Pelletier. The DHY, the portion that Harwich would pay, would be approximately $14 million. And I've heard that part of the reason we got out of DHY is governance. Well, if you want to have your own governance and your own control over it, you could build your own plant, $45 million. What I never heard, or what I would have liked to have heard at the last selectmen's meeting, is what would have been the cost, or do we have an estimate of what it would have cost for Dennis and Harwich? We don't know that. Dan Pelletier has given me some assurance it's not going to be much higher than the $14 million. We won't know for 4 years, basically, and we'll miss out for infrastructure funding on that option. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. How would you handle any potential conflicts of interest for you or a family member in conducting town business? We'll begin with Julie.
Well, if I had anybody in my family that had any kind of financial, gain or project or whatever in town, obviously I would recuse myself. I would not participate in any part of that. It's obviously just not compliant, and my background is compliance, so I'm all about compliance.
Thank you. Mark.
I don't really have any business in front of the town. I did have some business. I do have some business. I have a small kelp grant, which I'm basically not doing much anymore with. I did have a proposal before the town for a small scholar proposal. If that was to go, I have a partner in that, I would recuse myself and have my partner handle that going forward. But, I work part-time as a teacher. My wife is retired. I don't anticipate having any other business before the town.
Thank you. Jeff.
Thank you. If I'm fortunate enough to sit in that fifth seat, there will probably be the need for me to recuse myself. As many of you may know or may not know, the Handler's Auto Parts property has been remediated. We took on that project in February of 2019, and last week we got the all clear from the state. So we are thrilled about the fact that we took a brownfield that everybody in Harwich couldn't help but notice, and we cleaned it. And that was the intention of my family in purchasing that property, was to clean it, because we absolutely knew what everybody was feeling in the town. And the environment for us is also paramount, very, very important. We actually overcleaned the property. So now that we have our third well water test come back clean, we now have one more phase, and that phase will be to stabilize the coastal bank with some plantings. That might take about a year. At that point in time, we will then begin to figure out what we want to do with that property. And open space and green space is extremely important to us in the development process. That has already been laid in stone. It's not going to be housing. It's not going to be anything that's going to be not Harwich friendly. But I will have to recuse myself happily, and I will let the other people who are working on the project take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Two-part. Are we in a climate emergency? And if so, what are the most important steps Harwich can take to address the emergency? Mark.
Are we in a climate emergency? I think we are. I mean, all you had to do is watch the TV today and see the transit stations down in New York City being cascaded with water. The state has a resiliency fund that's come into place, and I was trying to think where that would work in Harwich. I think we have an excellent harbor master who could probably come up with some grant proposals that could take advantage of that. That could include the Allen Harbor Jetty reconstruction. But that's a great source of grants. ways. You know, I'm trying to think of, unlike in cities where you have seawalls with the water coming over, I can't think of any areas right now that we could take climate resiliency efforts or do construction right now. But again, I think the state has a resiliency fund. We should look at every possibility that we could use to take advantage of that. I mean, when you think about, we did a lot of forethought. The Sequatucket Harbor has been built with climate resiliency in mind. And I'm thinking of any other of the other shoreline properties. I mean, the new pier down at Witchmere has also been built higher. So I think in one sense we're in good shape, but if the seas rise as they're anticipated to do, we will have some big work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I don't know if we're in a climate emergency, but I do know our climate's changing. And I'm based in science. My degree from college is a science-based degree. So I pay attention to climate change conversation. And I don't think I'm the person to answer the question, are we in a climate change emergency? But what I can say is with the Hamlin's Auto Parts property, part of the coastal bank remediation from our lead environmental engineering consultant was to plan for the rise in our marsh. So I learned a lot. I don't have all the answers to this question, but I would suggest that Harwich forms a plan to stay in front of climate change. And as I'm learning as I go with the Handler's property, we can do that by stabilizing where the ocean meets the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
So I think we all are well aware that the climate is changing, and I would say an emergency, whether or not it's classified as emergency, I would say it is, because it's changing very quickly. And in an emergency, things happen quickly, and you need to react fast, and you need to have a plan. And if it's an emergency and we don't have a plan, we're in serious trouble. But luckily, that's not the case in Harwich. As Mark mentioned, we have a FEMA flood-compliant brand-new structure at Sequatucket Harbor. We were able to pull that building back out of the velocity zone, put it into the AE zone, which is a little bit better. I mean, any way we can improve. We also have a fire department that's forward-thinking, and, you know, many times people in town are probably frustrated, another new fire truck, whatever. Our fire department has been proactive in getting the quints, which are much higher fire trucks that can get through floodwaters, and that's important if you're in an emergency situation and need help. So we have some elements, but of course we need to be more prepared. We need to do more. We need to be more proactive. I would also say that as we watch the increase in tornadoes, we had a tornado in town. We lost trees. We lost other pieces of, you know, structures and such that we need to be concerned with, and we need to be prepared in order to make sure that we're making the right decisions and safe decisions, and that we're able to, of course, we all have to meet the floodplain requirements. If you've got a property that's within a floodplain, you are required to meet that. But we need to do more. We currently have a bylaw that allows people to raise their homes to meet the flood requirement, while also being cognizant of the height restrictions. But you must be able to let people build their homes so they can sustain the changes in our environment.
Thank you. Next question. How have you supported the democratic process in Harwich, town meeting, voting? Jeff?
Thank you. This is the one area that I wish I did much better with. I chose for the last 30 years to take care more of my family, my business, and travel than I did be a willing and I would say consistent participant with respect to our town's democratic process. I wish I could go backwards, but I can't. So I can only look forwards. And I believe now I've put myself in a position through 30 years of hard work to become more involved in our democratic process. And my hope is that I could be somewhat of a role model to the countless people who fall in that category who don't have 2 feet in with respect to how our town runs. And whether or not I end up in that 5th seat, I can promise you, I'm going to be here a lot, and I'm going to be much more involved in our town's democratic process, in the inner workings of our town, and hopefully generating more interest with the people who haven't voted for whatever reason, whether they felt uninformed, whether they felt their voices would never be heard, which I did feel a bit of. And I should have done better, and I'll be the first to admit that. But I hope to do better in a much bigger scale if I can sit in that 5th seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
So I have participated in town meeting and elections, pretty much since I've been here, obviously. I'm a government geek. I feel like it's really important to be part of, the process. I've attended many public hearings, and because I'm interested and I want to know what's going on. So in that respect, I've attended town meeting regularly. I've voted regularly, but I've also, any time that there's been issues in town and whatever, I think it's pretty well known that I'm fairly vocal. I think my friends will also say that. I think it's important to educate people. Just in respect to, if I could go back to the subject we talked about a few minutes ago in terms of the environment, I would also point out the importance of paying for the changes that we need to do to address things in town to make sure that they are flood and weather compliant. But I would also point out that we got $2 million in grants at Saquatucket Harbor. And I would agree, and I think the board has talked about this more extensively, is the need to get more people involved, more people who can write grants and know ways that they can save the town money. I think that's a really well invested position that we should be looking hard at. Though we have some very talented people in town, we need more of that.
Thank you. Mark?
I vote in every election. Town meeting, not as well because I usually have to work on Saturdays. But in terms of the democratic process, I think, as I mentioned the word civility, I think we need to foster that in town. We need to foster that selectment meeting. So when people come here, they're treated respectfully, they feel free to speak, and you therefore get people able to come back and talk again. That's how you foster democracy. Selectmen should not be making their decision in a vacuum. This room, when you have selectmen's meetings, should be filled like this every time. So that is democratic process, getting the input. As I told you earlier, I wouldn't have known about a lot of things unless I have gone door to door. And I've learned a lot about the treasure chest. I've learned somewhat about the golf course. And I'd like to return to just one other thing about the environment. Last week, we had Maggie Downey here from the Cape Cod Light Compact, and you're probably all going to hear a lot about heat pumps. In several towns now, they're not letting you hook up to gas. I have to tell you, several years ago, when we had a lot of power outages, I have a 98-year-old mother. She stayed in bed for days. She wouldn't come over to stay with me. I appreciated my natural gas. I ran the stove for heat. And I would just say that in terms of environmental things, to go with just heat pumps is a dangerous thing, especially for the elderly population here. We need our natural gas because Eversource, despite their best efforts, we will lose power because of our location and our changing climate.
Thank you. Next question. Town leaders are often in the public eye. What character standards should we expect from our leaders? Julie?
So I think that that's very true. You have town leaders, and they should be, I'll go to Mark's point, of civil. They should be good listeners. They should be moral. You really can't hold this position without having morals, because you have to gain the trust of the people who voted you in and those who didn't, more importantly. So I would say that not only do you need to communicate, not only do you need to be trustworthy and have a moral compass, but you do need to be civil. You need to be civil whether it's you're sitting on the board, and trust me, I made those comments when I was on the board, that we needed to be able to discuss subjects that we might not agree with each other on, but they needed to be done in a civil manner with respect for the other person. And that is the same that should be done for, to Mark's point, anyone attending a meeting, but even beyond that. Wherever you are in town, you should be civil and respectful, and you should be willing to listen. I think that those are the most important traits, and not only listen, but to listen, come back, share that information, formulate a plan to address those concerns. That's why you're holding a seat on this board, and whether it's the treasure chest, whether it's climate issues or taxes, you need to listen, and you need to pay attention, and you need to collaborate with your board members in a civil manner.
Thank you. Mark?
Would you mind asking that question one more time? So
Not at all. How have you supported the democratic process? Oh, I'm sorry. We did that one.
Yes. And
Number 9. We're up to number 9. So this is good. Town leaders are often in the public eye. What character standards should we expect from our leaders?
You should expect the conduct that I do in my regular life. I try to live my life in an honest, hardworking way. I wouldn't consider running for selectman if I had defects in my moral character, because they'd be out there for people to see. So, my private life is almost how I will live my public life. I will be a straight shooter. I will be a listener. I'll be respectful to you. I want you to like me, and I want to like you. I mean, that sounds simplistic, but that's how I want to treat you, so that you feel free to come to me, and I feel free to go to you, and I may disagree with you. But I have to say, I've learned a lot just talking with people here in town. So I hope I answered that question.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. There is a fantastic book called Leaders Eat Last, and I would urge you all to read it. It is exactly what we all should strive for in choosing our leaders, our town government, or the people that we look up to and try to gain knowledge from. I think being in the public eye consistently will make it very clear who deserves to be there and who doesn't deserve to be there. I think honesty, integrity, and communication are at the top of the list. Then as you go further down the list, I think the old adage, seek to understand first. Because if you don't understand the problem, or you don't understand where the person that you're talking to is coming from, there's absolutely no possible way that you can be part of a solution to help that person or help the town. I also feel it's super important to not be afraid to say, I don't know, and go find the answer. And I say that a lot more than I wish to, but I always end up going and finding the answer and fulfilling the commitment that I make when I say I will go find out for you. And I think with respect to town government, there is so much to know that it's virtually impossible for anyone up here to sit and be an expert on absolutely everything that comes before the board. But you have to have the willingness, the commitment to the town and to the people of the town who voted you in to put in the time, put in the effort, and go find the answers. And when you find the answers, as Mark said, bring them forward with civility and humility and compassion and all the things that my wife says, we learn everything we need to know about how to be a good person in kindergarten, right? Share, don't hit, treat people fairly.
Don't hit.
I subscribe to that whole thing my wife says all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question. We did talk about participation in government and affairs. What steps would you take to help the town increase diversity of participation in town affairs? Mark?
Diversity in town affairs. Well, I have asked, and I've brought this up several times, and this is not necessarily in town affairs, but I've brought it up to the police chief. I do remember when I was a policeman here, I dealt with Chief Rainio. I dealt with Officer Fernandez, and I asked him, I said, why couldn't we have more diversity in the police force, and for that matter, the firefighters? And he had some good reasons. I know it's for whatever reason, it's tougher to recruit people now. I do think that is a goal that the town should strive for, to represent the community better. In terms of town government, I have to say, as I became a selectman, how many different committees there are in this town. I understand there is some difficulty in recruiting new members now, and I would give a look at where, if possible, you could consolidate that, if it's possible. And I think by doing that, you could have committees that are at full force and bring them up to the board. The finance committee, some of these committees are just fantastic, but there's a lot of committees. So if that becomes an issue, let's look at trying to streamline that. And still, when I'm a selectman, I don't, as Jeff just said, I'm not an expert on a lot of this stuff, but these committees, as I've come to find, again, the finance committee, the golf committee, they know their stuff. And that's who I'd go to listen to for a lot of the decisions I would make. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Could you repeat that question one more time,
Yes.
please, if you don't mind? Thank you.
What steps would you take to help the town increase diversity of participation in town affairs?
Thank you. So, back when I decided to run for selectman, accessibility to our constituents was one of the things that I chose to make extremely important and almost be my constitution. And I firmly believe that in order to have a more diverse way about our town, we need to seek out the individuals and be accessible to them so that they can become part of what we call Harwich. And so many times we rely on the community to seek the information, find it for themselves. And sometimes they don't know where to find that information. I think our town government needs to be a bit more accessible to the people who are looking for answers and make it a lot more comfortable for them to become part of the process. I know in my personal life, there have been plenty of things I've wanted to jump into, but I felt there was no possible way I was going to put myself out there and feel anything other than inadequate. And that's where I think where diversity comes in. I think we need to have a more user-friendly way to bring people to the communities and our the committees and our town government. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
I would love to see our town government more diversified. I also think, same thing, we have some really terrific committees, but I'd love to see different people on them at different times. That, it's very hard to recruit people. When I was on the board, and I know it remains a problem, it's hard to get people to volunteer to do these committees, and some of it is time. It's time consuming, and depending on what committee you're on. I also think that what happens is the same people tend to go to the same committees, and there's not a lot of change there. I'd love to see more women involved. I think that, whether or not you're on one committee or another, when you're sharing that information with your friends and such, you may be able to spread the word better so that you maybe pique some interest. But I think that it's important to understand, first and foremost, we have trouble filling the committees with different people and different volunteers. So I would be open to any kind of discussion, group to group. Think of different innovative ways in town to go around to different groups that maybe you wouldn't normally think that somebody in that particular group would be interested in a seat. But any which way that you can go, because our committees and our town government should represent the diversity of our citizens, and it shouldn't be all the same type of people on these committees. And it also often is the same as the Board of Selectmen. Sometimes you need to mix it up, right? Sometimes certain people are on for a long time, and it's just that's because they were willing to run and they were willing to take that seat. But other people need to be willing to get involved so that we can change it up. I think it's really important, and I'd be open to any way to diversify.
We're going to follow up with that question, which was number 10, with number 10A. And we're going to go in order of Mark, Jeff, and Julie, like we just did. Does holding town committee meetings during the day hurt recruiting new members? Mark?
I think it does. You want to have say, for example, a Board of Selectmen. They do have the meetings in the evening. And I spoke to all the selectmen before, and credit to all of them. All of them said they put in at least 15 hours in terms of preparation. In terms of daytime meetings, certain committees could work during the daytime. But on some of the committees, and I may not know the exact committee that this would apply to, but if it's a committee that, say, like may be involved with children's sports, for example, where the parents are working parents, yes, those committees should meet in the evening. Golf committee, a lot of golfers in town are retired. You could do that during the day. So I think you have to look at it in the committee and who it is dealing with. If it's dealing with children, young people, I think that would be a good thing to have that committee meet during the evening. If it's a committee where a lot of the people are retired and have the time, yes, meet during the day.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I think it can't help but limit the potential of candidates. I think it would be an impossible belief to think that if you hold your meetings at 1 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, you are limiting a tremendous amount. You're basically taking away a tremendous amount of people who could be potential candidates. I also think that when you hold meetings at a certain time of the day, you tend to get the same kind of people on those committees. The retired, if it's held at 1 o'clock, you're going to be seeing an awful lot of retired people on that committee. And let's not forget the younger population, the 20 plus, 20 to 50-year-olds, who I think could do a wonderful job on some of these committees, but they're working 7 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and it makes it extremely difficult to bring them in. So I think we need to figure out a way to make it available to all people of all demographics. If we're asking for diversity, we have to foster that. We can't just have meetings in the afternoons or in the evenings. There needs to be a little bit of a change.
Thank you. Julie?
So I do think that, having meetings during the day does limit. I agree with both Mark and Jeff, because ultimately, any opportunity to expand that base means that if you're opening it up to evening meetings, then you're going to get more working people who are willing to maybe sit on a board. But I will also go on the other side of that and say, watching, in my 3 years, watching the difficulty that we had in filling vacancies on various committees or people resigning from them, the retired population are really the bulk of the volunteers on these various committees. Not all, right? But if some of them feel that they don't want to drive at night or they don't want to be up that late, then we would potentially lose a lot more members on our committee, and then we would be in a more difficult position. So I would say that it's not an easy solution. I would also say in the same token that if the golf, right now is mostly retired, there probably is a young guy or girl out there or who would like to be on the golf committee, but it is in the daytime, so maybe they could do it at night. I think that each committee needs to look at their makeup and try to figure out if they can diversify the time and to increase the people who could be on their committee. I think it's really a problem that one thing supersedes the other. So.
Thank you. Next question. How would you balance the needs and rights of businesses with the needs and rights of neighbors and neighborhood residents? Jeff.
Thank you. Fantastic question. A question that is right in front of us, right in front of our faces every day. I went on record a little while ago, and I think it all boils down to communication and cooperation. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say, that until the owners of the businesses and until the people who live next door and are being infringed upon. Until there's communication between those two groups, we'll call them, I don't think we're going to find a solution. I think we're going to see a lot of what we see right now, which is positional bargaining in the Hatfields and the McCoys. And I think it's a really sad situation for our town, because it shows that globally we don't have the tools necessary to solve a problem. And, you know, our board is trying. I spoke with the police yesterday, and they don't like the position. I don't think anybody likes the position we're in. But there needs to be some forward progress with respect to communication and town cooperation to find a balance. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is a balance. Both sides have to get a little bit of what they need, and then I believe it can work. But it's going to take a little bit of hard work and some communication and cooperation. Thank you.
Julie.
I agree. It's an incredibly difficult, situation for both sides. And I was on the board when we came up with 150 feet in terms of noise, which is really difficult and kind of miscellaneous. I think it puts the police in a difficult situation. I think really, to me, if I were to boil it down for both sides, I would say respect. Respect for the noise, after 10 p.m. And I know that even some people have a difficulty living with the 10 p.m., but we do have to find a common denominator, so that's where we came to 10 p.m. But I would also say that, neighbors also need to understand that we do need business in town, and we've all benefited from that. We've seen Harwich really grow. And those businesses have a limited amount of time to make their money. And when you think about, and I can't say, 9 months out of the year, but probably 8 months out of the year, you're not dealing with all of this noise. So somewhere in the middle, I would like to see them both respect each other and understand that the businesses need to thrive and they need to make their money and they have a limited time, but they also need to be respectful of their neighbors. And, if there's ways to tone the music down, if there's ways to insulate, then, we should look at that. But it is a really difficult situation.
Thank you. Mark.
Again, as I called on people, and I called on people in the area of where the restaurants were, I found a general happiness with the way things have been policed this year. Several residents who lived near the port said in previous years they could hear the bass, they could hear the music. They said this year they didn't have any problems. They were happy, at least on the people that I called, and I went all through that neighborhood, with how things have worked out. And I think that's because the restaurant owners in the town worked together to solve that problem. And I think we have a good class of business owners in town. The owner of Allen Harbor is building a shop up near Villa Roma. And one of the abutters said, as long as he doesn't store boats out there, I'm fine with it. And I met the owner of Allen Harbor. He's a very responsible guy. He has a boat storage area. And I think, again, most business owners here in town are good people. They want to be good neighbors. So I think, to wrap it up, the town has done a good job addressing the noise problem. I've heard feedback from people that it has worked. I think we have to be vigilant. I think it's important when that spring meeting comes that those restaurants that have liquor license, that they don't show up for the education that the police chief gives, that a police officer is sent to their place of business with a letter saying show up or else. So I think between enforcement by the police department and just good neighborly relations, and I'll give tribute. I think this has been a big problem in town. It's solved, but it has to require constant vigilance. Thank you.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions about affordable housing, and they were so close, I'm going to read this one. Nitrogen. Oh, dear. That was a W. Sorry. Nitrogen, sewering, affordable housing, environmental problems, pollution, water quality, etc., are symptoms of growth and development. What is your position for growth for Harwich? Julie.
So I would say that, first of all of those items are some of the reasons, obviously, that we are sewering, and we have to sewer according to the Conservation Law Foundation suit. So the sewering has to occur. That is part of cleaning up our water. We're losing our young families. We do not have housing for the children. I know my kids, if they may not be able to stay here because I don't know how they'd afford to live here unless they continue to live at my house. So I think ultimately, there has to be some ability to create housing. And the property that's here in town, people have property rights. They can develop their property. They can rehab their property. And other different types of elements of trying to create housing, even on town-owned land. You have to be able to clean the nitrogen. So if it's by sewer, IA, et cetera, you have to be able to provide housing in order to keep your town to survive. So I think that, as I think it was Larry Ballantyne mentioned the other night, we have to be able to at least be considering that while we're working towards our sewering, we have to plan for moderate growth, not high development, but we've got to be proactive in trying to create, housing for our people. I don't know where they will live if we can't address that. And that will contribute nitrogen, which is why we need the sewers anyway.
Thank you. Mark?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question
Sure.
again?
Nitrogen, sewering, affordable housing, environmental problems, pollution, water quality, etc., are symptoms of growth and development. What is your position for growth for Harwich?
In terms of growth, I'll go back to the 6 million of outstanding taxes and land unclaimed or owner unknown. We need to attack that. We need to bring it down. Other towns have done it. I think that will give us some control over growth. Developers probably have departments already working on that thing, and we need to get ahead of them. So I think that's good. In terms of nitrogen, there was the EPA is getting involved with Barnstable County or some of the local agency in trying innovative alternative systems, looking at different systems. So I'm very hopeful. I mean, the sewering project we have is going to exist over the course of 40 years. I'm very hopeful that over that period of time that some of the work that's being done by the EPA and Barnstable County will come up with some innovative alternative systems. Where if you're at the meeting on Wednesday, there's some areas in town that are not densely populated, where we could avoid bringing sewer there and avoid the expense of all we have to do. Growth, when we put a sewer system in, that may allow for certain areas to have more affordable housing. I mean, I go back, it is a serious problem in town. People cannot find housing. Even in the police department, they're short of 5 people, and one of the reasons is they can't find housing. I've heard of cases where good teachers could have been hired, they couldn't find housing. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. New innovative alternative systems. Let's get going on the 6 million and get the people who are, the land owner and loan, so we can take it under our control and maybe do some housing that's spread out all over the community. So.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I believe the question was specific to how I feel about growth. But I'd be remiss if I didn't state that Yarmouth and Dennis, part of their reason for their wastewater projects is for growth. And it was made very clear in both economic growth and residential growth. It was made clear on Monday night that our path with respect to the CWMP is not for growth, but responsible growth, but not for big growth, like a Chloe's Path project or such. That we need to understand that the growth of this town needs to be targeted and responsible. It has to happen to a certain degree. And we have to clean the water. And our town's path is not for growth, it's for environmental protection and nitrogen removal. And that was loud and clear to me, and I support that vision and that path 100%. While understanding that responsible and targeted growth, when I say target, I mean for the right reason. And that is for our workforce housing and our affordable housing. I did take some notes while Mark was talking because this encompasses so many different aspects of why I want to sit for selectmen. It is so important that the person who sits in that fifth seat, when they revise the CWMP to bring the targeted growth from 41% down to 14%, that we stay on that path.
Thank you.
We don't let it get away from us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next
Thank
question. You all have a long history with Harwich. What one thing do you regret has happened to Harwich in these years, and what would you do to change that issue? Mark. I'm sorry. 1 second. Yes, Mark.
You know, this is, one regret that I have is some of the developments in town that exist have a scale that wouldn't be allowed now. You know, in the past, things may have occurred that wouldn't have happened now, and it has affected different neighborhoods. But I have to say, and I'm not trying to avoid answering the question, when I've gone to hundreds of people's homes, people are generally happy with Harwich. And, you know, I was mentioning to my wife today, I said, you know, I remember when Red River Beach was, the lavatories were ready to fall in the water. The beach was all scoured. We have a beautiful beach now. You can't even get a parking space there. We have a school that was difficult to even heat with the underground pipes and the asbestos. We have a beautiful school right now. So, you know, I don't have any regrets. I think Harwich has done a wonderful job. It's something to be proud of. And as I said in my opening statement, if we work together, if we can work together, solve our wastewater problems, solve our affordable housing problems, and renegotiate our school agreement with Monomoy, we're on a good trajectory going forward. So.
Thank you. Jeff.
Thank you. I think before my run for selectman, I probably would have said something different. But in the last 8, 9 weeks of speaking to an awful lot of people about what they feel has been lost over the years. And, you know, my dad, who's, 78 years old, and his group of people, they all say the same thing. They feel that Harwich has lost them, and they have lost Harwich. And that breaks my heart because, like I said, I've been here 100 years. And the job of selectmen is to represent absolutely everybody and be the voice for everybody who lives in this town. And if that whole group of people, at least everyone I've spoken to, they all share the same sentiment, that Harwich has lost them and they have lost Harwich, and Harwich has moved on. And I'm not far from that 70-year-old. I mean, I'm 53 years old. Things go by quickly. Things happen quickly. And when you sit and you talk to, they call themselves the old timers. They're not happy with the way things have gone. And it would be very important for me to make that population of Harwich feel like Harwich still cares and that they have a place here. And it's not just development and business and just grow. And the Monomoy School, the regionalization of the school system. So many people from Harwich were hurt by that. Whether it had to happen or it didn't have to happen, it happened. And that's what we are dealing with now, and we have to revisit that agreement. But so much has been lost, I think, for that population. And I would do everything I could to fix that.
Thank you. Julie.
So I think some of the things that have been discussed here, the school, for example. I think sometimes people have a hard time with change. I think we all do have a hard time with change, so I think sometimes regret comes from not having what was your past and that you have to give up some of that. I personally feel lucky to live here. I don't have a lot of regrets. I think the only regrets, as I sat here listening, trying to really dig deep to figure out regrets, one regret I have, which I never even got to see, is to hear about the beautiful mercantile building that was knocked down years ago. And that's something I wish that was still here and that we could all benefit from, so that's one thing. And I would say probably the only other regret I really have is that I didn't get involved in town government sooner. Because, you know, when I participated with the board, I met, you know, great people on the board. One of them's here this evening. And, you know, I really learned a lot. And I learned a lot about my town. And, you know, I think that that was such a benefit. So if those are the only things I can come up with in terms of regrets. I should have run sooner, and I would have loved to have seen that building. That's it.
Thank you. Before we do our closing statements, I just want to let you know of the items that we didn't get to. And our candidates will be staying, I'm told, after we complete this, which is around 7:30. So if you want further explanation on some of these, which I will read very quickly, you can speak with each candidate. One is about freshness or newness that you expect to bring to the current board, and be specific. Oftentimes, elected officials have a personal agenda. Can you assure us that you'll represent the people of Harwich over your own personal agenda? Are there any other issues you see coming in the next 10 years that will affect our town that have not already been mentioned? Where do you stand on reopening the treasure chest? So those are some. Before they do their closing, let's give them a round of applause because they've done a wonderful job. Thank you. And with that real technology of picking a number, our closing statement will be first done by Jeff.
Thank you. And again, thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of your day to share this time with us. You know, the question I've been asked most of all is, why am I running? And it really is impossible to sum up in 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because just when I think I've said it all, a bunch more pops into my head. You know, as I stated earlier, I love this town, and I believe in this town. I believe in the people in this town. And my focus will be on results. And I've always said to the athletes and the people I've worked with in the past, you can't fake results. And if you look back to our last several years in town government, there hasn't been many results that have come forward. And I plan on focusing on results. And I'm running a campaign that is not about running against people or Mark and Julie. I'm running a campaign that is about bringing people together to work toward a common vision. A vision that I've seen for 53 years. I've seen where we've been, I see where we are, and I hopefully will be part of where we're going. And all the issues that surround our town right now, they're all part of one common thing, and that common thing is Harwich. And that's where I'm from, and that's where I'm going to be. So thank you, and I hope you'll vote for me on the 21st of September.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. I enjoyed this very much. You know, I look at my life, I look at it as two components, service and accomplishments. In terms of service, I raised my children on my own. I was a single parent. I've been a big brother for a number of years. As a matter of fact, my first little brother I am still in contact with after 30 years. As I mentioned before, I do Meals on Wheels. I do a prison ministry. So, you know, I'm service-oriented. I want to serve. I want to help people. In terms of accomplishments, and this goes with my job as a project manager and as a teacher, I'm decisive. I like to get things done. I want to get things done. And finally, as I mentioned before, I don't want to bemoan the word, I want to bring to the board a level of respect with each other. I want to call each other colleagues. but I also want the people who come to feel respected and welcome, because good governance requires input from all the people. And that's why I'd like to be your selectman. Again, September 21st. Early voting starts on Tuesday, and you can call the town clerk to get a vote-by-mail application. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you. Julie?
So again, I'd like to say thank you all for coming and taking the time. I think it's really important to be listening and judging to figure out what you want for your town. I also want to thank the Voter Information Committee and the League. Again, I appreciate the opportunity for the forum. I hope that you will look at my record on the board and my willingness to serve previously, and look at that and understand that I am coming to this election, and this is an 8-month term, a very short period of time to be able to learn all of the different difficult items on the board's agenda, and be able to be up and functioning. As we talked about, the members of the board already put in a lot of hours. It's a lot of work. And the subject matter is complicated, and we have a short period of time. We have a special town meeting. We have budget season. We have to worry about the warrant. All of these things come fast and furious, and I'm prepared. And I hope that you will support me on September 21st, and that's another problem, right? It's September. Who's even thinking about voting? So overall, I hope you look at my experience on the board. I hope you feel that I'm the best person to serve on that 5th seat vacated by Steve's passing, and a wonderful, wonderful selectman that the town was very lucky to have, and I hope I can complete that seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Emily has a few closing statements.
Thank you all so much. And thank you all for the excellent questions. I appreciate your participation. That's really what keeps things going. Thank you, Joy, for the reminder. I'm short and I have to stand close. I won't keep you all really for long. I know you could have some follow-up questions. Everyone's wondering about that transfer station reopening of the treasure chest. But I do want to encourage you all to share the recording of this event with your neighbors and friends. Jamie, thank you for being here tonight. We have been live broadcast, which I meant to mention to you at the start and forgot. But this is also being recorded and will be on the Channel 18 YouTube page. So you can share that link with your neighbors or anyone who was not able to attend tonight so that they can get the information as well. And then quickly, September the 21st, it should already be on your calendar. Polling hours are 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then October the 18th is special town meeting, 6:30 at the community center. If you're not registered to vote, you still have until October the 8th to do so, and you would be able to participate in that special town meeting. So thank you, candidates. Thank you, League. Thank you, Channel 18. And thank you guys for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you did a great job.